Hello friends, it's the Stitches. It has been a few years since my last zine review, so I thought I'd pull a couple interesting titles from my collection and just talk about them. Here I have issue 3 and 4 of Girl Germs, which was created by members of the Riot Girl band Bratmobile. If you're familiar with Bikini Kill, Bratmobile came from the same area right around the same time. Like, literally, the members of both bands were attending the same university at roughly the same time. I have a review of some of Kathleen Hanna's zines on this channel, so I'll link those down below. But getting back to Girl Germs, these are very obviously not original copies. I will link the Etsy shop that I got them from in the description. I only have these two because, at least at the time that I bought them, Riot Girl Press only had these two available. So if someone has access and wants to make me a copy of issues 1 and 2, that would be really cool. But for now, I just have 3 and 4. I think these are from 1991 to 1992. They aren't very well dated, but that's the impression I got while reading them. DC Public Library has issue 4 available for free on their website, and they have it dated to 1992. I think the Riot Girl collection book also has some of the Girl Germs zine content in it as well, but I have yet to buy a copy of it for myself. But for now, let's start with issue 3. I should note that these zines, like most Riot Girl zines, do regularly make pretty graphic references to SA. That was sort of one of the hallmarks of the movement. There was very much this attitude of, if this is what we have to deal with, then you will be forced to hear about it, which is just something to be aware of when looking at these kind of things. This issue is broken up into 5 chapters. I'm not really sure what defines each chapter, but they're there. The first piece of writing is a very stream of consciousness essay type thing. It's somewhere between a poem and an essay, and largely it's about learning to embody contradictory messages and embracing that. And it's called the Square and Circle Club. And there's the quote that circles exist within squares and squares exist within circles. I think a lot of times we tend to have this very like all or nothing approach to basically everything in life, and that's just kind of not how anything works. And the next couple pages are some letters from readers. I'm not going to get too into their content. And then we get to chapter 2. Here you can really see that Xerox of a Xerox effect in action. A lot of these zines, unfortunately, are very hard to read, but this particular piece is about being in an abusive relationship, and it's called But You Told Me To. And the author, Julie, discusses the way that her ex would force her to do things that she didn't want to do in public around their friends, and then berate her for it in private, which is sadly a very common experience. Since Riot Girl was a branch of feminism in the 90s, there was this common theme of discussing these typically very private matters and forcing them out into the light so that others would have to acknowledge that they were common issues. It very much reminds me of the Me Too movement. Next, we have an article written by a woman named Langa. I think that's how it's pronounced. This particular individual appears to have been a rather regular contributor. There's a letter from her in the next zine as well. And this was, in my opinion, one of the most interesting pieces in this zine. The author is Chinese American, and her family moved a lot throughout China and Hong Kong and various other places in the Pacific before moving to the US. And the article is just a really fascinating personal history where they talk about their relationship with their family and their desire to hold on to their cultural heritage. It goes on for several pages, and I'm really glad that this one was a bit more legible because I really wouldn't have wanted to miss out on any of it. The last piece in this chapter I'm not really going to get into because it is very graphic and discusses CSA to an extent that is not really appropriate for YouTube and YouTube censorship. It's still a very important story to tell, just not YouTube friendly. And then the next article at the beginning of chapter 3 is an educational piece about, we'll refer to it as self-love, just to avoid YouTube getting too mad at me. I'm already using a lot of words that it doesn't really like. And it's just very basic educational information that focuses on clearing up some of the common myths concerning women who engage in the act. The next couple pages have some more illegible bits. I wonder how many times this scene was copied before we got to this particular version of it. And then we have what appears to be the second installment of a series about something. I'm sure. It says at the end that there will be a third part, but issue 4 doesn't have a continuation of this story, and I'm a little bit disappointed because I just have so many questions. So in this story, one of the characters is named Vegan, and I feel like that is all that you need to know. Everyone appears to be in a band of some sort, and it takes place during a concert, and overall, there's just a lot of edgy, I'm 14 and this is deep sentiment. It really feels like something that a teenager in the 90s who has very recently discovered the general concept of feminism would write. Sadly, it is a part 2, and I have no context for anything that happens, so I can't really even try to grasp at anything resembling a plot. But after that absolute masterpiece, there is a letter from someone in Indiana, and it's actually kind of interesting. She mentions that she tried to join a local women's group, but found out that it was nothing but white women who were clearly only interested in issues that affect white women specifically, and their leader told her that the work that she had done for gay rights prior didn't count because she was bi, and so by definition, she can't consider herself part of that community. And I would personally never speak to any of the people in that women's group ever again if I were her, because that's not how that works. Chapter 4 starts with an interview with a member of the band Love Child, and at the end it provides a P.O. box that readers can send $7 to if they want a copy of their LP, which feels like the most 90s thing a person can possibly do. Next, we have a summer top 10 list, which reminds me of the old school YouTube videos that were like my summer faves. This list is mostly made up of music, and there are more P.O. boxes provided for ordering music from. If you are old enough to have ordered a cassette tape or anything similar by sending money to some random P.O. box, please let us know about that experience in the comments down below. This list also mentions an event called the International Pop Underground Convention and lists several bands that were going to be playing there. And I'm gonna have you put that information in the back of your head because there will be an update on this in the next scene. Next, we get to a little snippet about different microaggressions that are directed towards lesbians by straight women. And they're all, unfortunately, still very common things that happen today. Like one of them, for example, is do not assume that she is dying to talk about being a lesbian. And also, do not expect her to refrain from talking about being a lesbian. Do not trivialize her experience by assuming it is a bedroom issue only. She is a lesbian 24 hours a day. Do not assume that because she is a lesbian, she wants to be treated like a man. Do not assume that her heart will leap with joy if you touch her arm, which comes back to, at the very beginning, it says, do not assume that she is attracted to you. Do not assume that she is not attracted to you. The next few pages are a glowing review of some works by the then 18-year-old filmmaker Sadie Benning. Benning used a children's camera to make very surreal autobiographical works. They included what appears to be a playbill from the film festival that the author attended where they discovered Sadie Benning's work. And these 6 titles are the films that they played, which at the time was the majority of her body of work. I'll be sure to leave a link to an Internet Archive page where you can watch these if you're interested. And then we have another letter sent from a reader. At the bottom of the page, there's this little picture of these 2 kids with text that says "Skip likes boys," and something about it just really reminds me of that one SpongeBob meme for some reason. And now every time that I look at it, I can't unsee the SpongeBob meme, and it cracks me up a little bit. Now we've made it to the final chapter, and it starts with a review of the band Circus Lupus. There are definitely worse band names, but there are also definitely better ones. And then there's a couple of pages dedicated to the P.O. boxes of zines and music distros, where at one time you could have sent money and stamps for a zine or music on either a cassette or an LP. And you can see where someone has crossed out addresses that are no longer relevant, although these days I would assume that none of these addresses are relevant anymore. Getting towards the end of the zine, we have more creative writing. This one is about a waitress that the author is in love with. And then the last few pages are a little bit about the people that put this scene together, with Molly and Allison being the 2 that started Bratmobile. And so that's issue 3. Before we jump into issue 4, I'm going to do the very unpunk act of forcing you to sit through an ad for me. Unless you have YouTube Premium, in which case you'll have a couple seconds of awkward silence. And we are back. Here we have issue 4 of Girl Germs. This issue doesn't have any chapter breaks, which is fine because they felt kind of unnecessary anyway. Like I said in the beginning of this video, the DC Public Library has scanned a copy of this and made it available for free on their website. So I'll leave a link for that in the description for anyone who wants to take their time flipping through it and maybe actually try to read everything. Like in the last issue, the introduction of sorts is sort of a stream of consciousness-esque creative writing piece. It's not as coherent, in my opinion, as the intro to the last scene, but it does have a lot of the same themes, like just the general sense of feeling alienated by greater society. But in this one, Molly, the author, is able to find other girls that just sort of get it. The next couple pages are a letter from Lenga again, who wrote the piece about her cultural heritage in the last issue. She's also included a couple of drawings. In the letter itself, she talks about some growing pains that she's experiencing in college, very typical things that all students get when they go to college. Especially when it comes to class discussion and class participation. I think anyone who has ever been to college knows how awkward those types of situations can be, especially if you are at like a 4-year university where the majority of people there are fairly young and haven't really spent that much time outside of their parents' houses, because a lot of people like to assume that they know everything when they very clearly do not. Then we have more letters from readers. And then we get to this piece, which has some lore behind it, and it sent me on a little bit of journey when I was reading through it. At first glance, this sort of looks like a poem, but it flows like song lyrics, and the author credited does not sound like a person. It sounds more like a band name and a song title. So I'm going to assume that these are in fact song lyrics. I'm not going to say the name of the band out loud because, again, YouTube censorship, but you are free to read it on your own. It doesn't appear that this particular band ever released a full album or an EP or anything. I certainly wasn't able to find any version of this particular song being played. What I did find, however, was another song that I believe is them on Kill Rockstar's YouTube channel. Kill Rockstar is the label that Bratmobile released their music through. They were also Bikini Kill's label and several other smaller punk bands. At one point, Kill Rockstars released a mixtape with several different bands that included what I believe is the one singular song that this band ever officially released. Proof that these old zines really are just time capsules full of all sorts of weird little finds. The next several pages are an interview between Allison and the band 7 Year Bitch, which is one of my absolute favorite punk bands. They actually talk about the meaning behind the song No Fucking War, which I have played in the car at full volume more times than I can count. So personally, I was really excited to find this interview in here. Next, there's a very strange piece of writing about a woman in a freak show, but like from her perspective. Unfortunately, the first couple letters in each line on the edge here was cut off when it was copied. And there are also little bits of this that are very difficult for me to read. More excitingly though, the next couple pages are a review, or rather a summary, of what happened during the International Pop Underground event that was mentioned in the last issue. It does seem like it was mostly successful. The reviewer says that the bands weren't played in any real logical order, and it felt very much like an open mic event because of how each of the different bands had different sounds. And there wasn't really any special importance given to one band over another, which some people seemed to have liked and some people seemed to have not liked. The reviewer was clearly one of the ones who enjoyed it. The summary is mostly very hopeful, although the author expressed that it's kind of sad that events like this, where every band is either an all-girl band or a girl majority band, are seen as sort of like a novelty, and events like this will probably continue to be seen as a novelty, and sadly, I do think that that's still kind of true. The next piece is another work of creative writing. This one is about being a closeted lesbian and wanting to be with other women, but ending up with men because there doesn't seem to be any other options available, and then not enjoying it or potentially even having traumatic experiences from it, but just sort of having to brush it off and move on, which is something that I imagine a lot of young lesbian women felt at the time, and even today is probably still very relatable, especially for those who grew up in smaller rural areas where people tend to be a little bit more closed-minded. And we have a piece by Allison, really more of a rant by Allison about punks and the punk subculture and how some people in the scene seem to be just reinforcing a lot of the same negative behaviors and mindsets that punk is supposedly against, which is also something that is still, to this day, very relevant. Next, we have a couple poems about SA. YouTube probably will not like them at all. Another top 10 list, this one much shorter, and some more definitely not YouTube approved poetry. Just like in the last issue, there's some zines and music distros with PO boxes where they could have at one time been reached. I really want to know what's going on in these pages right here, but just a huge chunk of my copy is just absolutely unreadable. And then the zine ends with a letter from a reader who is responding to the educational article that we've decided to call Self-Love from the last issue. She did agree with the majority of what was said in the original article, but she does bring up a lot of interesting points about the nature of intimacy and how virginity is really just kind of a social construct that really only applies to certain kinds of couples performing certain acts, and and basically completely leaves out the majority of gay people. I really recommend following the link in the description and reading this one for yourself. A lot of this has already been talked about at length in different corners of the internet, so it's probably not new information for anyone here, but at the time, in the 90s, this was a pretty radical viewpoint to have. And that is everything from these zines. On the backs, we have this space for an address, because at the time, nobody who made zines was spending money on envelopes. So they would just put a stamp in the corner and add an address to it, and then they would staple the zine shut to keep it together during shipping, and then when you got it, you would carefully remove the staples so that you could read it. So that was Girl Germs issue 3 and 4. I always love flipping through old zines from the 90s and early 2000s because while they are very much a product of their time in some aspects, there is still a lot in them that carries relevance today. As a movement, Riot Grrrl was far from perfect. Many of the members were not exactly practicing intersectionality, but I think that there's definitely a reason why Riot Grrrl has found a new audience among Gen Z and younger millennials online. It was a very confrontational form of feminism, and after movements like Me Too, a lot of girls are just simply fed up with being told how to act and how to feel. I'm glad that there are people who have seen the value in these types of zines and are actively working to preserve them and even at times reproduce them so that they can be seen by more people. I'm also really excited that recently Shotgun Seamstress released a massive book with their zines in it, and there are also tons of zine libraries all over the country working to preserve zines both old and new. So this is part of not just punk history, but art and cultural history in general. So it's really exciting that so many people are actually taking them seriously and see them as a valid expression of what people were feeling in that particular moment in time. But that's all for today's video. I hope everyone has a good day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!